Did medieval women whisper in the shadows, or did their voices echo through the halls of power, art, and daily life? Were they mere pawns in a patriarchal world, or did they forge their own paths between 500 and 1500 CE? Number 1. Women had no agency or power over their own lives. The idea that medieval women were completely without agency, entirely subservient to men, and without any control over their own existence often misses the complex realities of their lives. While societal structures and expectations were certainly different from modern times, women found and asserted power in numerous ways, even within constraints. Marriage, often seen as the ultimate symbol of female subjugation, sometimes involved negotiation and choice, particularly for aristocratic women. Dynastic marriages were arranged for political and economic reasons, yet the women involved were not always passive figures. Eleanor of Aquitaine, a powerful duchess in her own right, famously divorced Louis VII of France, a testament to her determination and influence. Her subsequent marriage to Henry II of England led to a vast Anglo-Angevin empire, where she played a crucial role. She actively governed Aquitaine for many years, even during her son's reigns, demonstrating significant administrative and political power. Blanche of Castile, regent for her son Louis IX of France, successfully navigated political challenges, put down rebellions, and secured the throne for her son, showing immense political acumen and direct power. These women were not simply pawns, they were active participants in the highest levels of political life, making decisions that shaped kingdoms. Beyond the thrones and noble houses, women also exercised agency in their personal choices. Entering a convent, for example, was not always a forced isolation, but often a deliberate choice for intellectual, spiritual, or even social advancement. For many women, particularly those from noble or wealthy families, a convent offered an alternative to marriage, allowing them to pursue education, scholarship, and a life dedicated to God, often with significant autonomy. Abbesses, like Hildegard of Bingen, not only managed vast estates and religious communities, but also corresponded with emperors, popes, and kings, offering advice and critiques. Her decisions within her convents and her public pronouncements show a profound sense of self-direction and authority. The choice to become a nun provided a structured environment where women could wield authority, manage finances, and cultivate intellectual pursuits, all activities that demonstrated significant personal agency. Women also held economic power and made independent decisions regarding their property and finances. Widows, in particular, often gained significant control over their dower lands and other assets. They could manage businesses, engage in trade, and participate in legal transactions. Marjorie Kempe, a laywoman from Norfolk, England, ran a successful brewing and milling business with her husband, and after some time she chose to pursue a life of religious pilgrimage and contemplation, a choice that involved significant personal determination and management of her resources. She traveled extensively, often against the wishes of her husband and some members of the clergy, asserting her spiritual path and her freedom of movement. Records show women in various towns and cities across Europe as independent merchants, artisans, and shopkeepers. In London, women are recorded in guild ordinances and court rolls as engaging in trade, owning property, and managing their own financial affairs. They often petitioned courts, made wills, and chose guardians for their children, indicating a direct involvement in legal and financial matters that profoundly affected their lives and their families' futures. Wills from the period, for instance, frequently reveal women making detailed provisions for their children, specifying bequests, and even naming executors, showing a clear exercise of their legal rights and personal desires. The ability of women to influence powerful men was another form of agency. Queens, noblewomen, and even common women could sway decisions through advice, persuasion, or their social standing. Eleanor of Aquitaine's influence over her sons, Richard the Lionheart and John, was considerable. She acted as a regent during Richard's absence on crusade, and actively intervened in political affairs, often to protect her son's interests and her own. Her political actions were not always those dictated by men. She pursued her own political agenda. Isabella of France, queen consort of Edward II of England, famously led a rebellion against her husband, ultimately deposing him and installing their son Edward III on the throne. This was an extreme example of female agency, demonstrating a woman's capacity to directly intervene in and alter the course of a kingdom. Even less dramatic examples, such as women petitioning rulers or local lords for favors, justice, or exemptions, highlight their ability to seek redress and influence outcomes. Court records from medieval England and France reveal numerous instances of women bringing cases to court, defending their rights, and actively pursuing justice, which required asserting their will and engaging with the legal system. These actions, whether on a grand political stage or in the daily struggles of life, reveal that medieval women were not passive recipients of their fate, but actively shaped their own lives and circumstances. Number 2. Women were viewed as inherently evil or weak, solely Eve's descendants. The pervasive belief that medieval society viewed women solely through the lens of Eve's original sin, as inherently evil, deceptive, or weak, is a simplified understanding of a much more nuanced perspective. While theological texts certainly discussed Eve's role in the fall, medieval culture also deeply venerated the Virgin Mary, presenting a powerful counter-narrative of female purity, grace, and redemption. The cult of the Virgin Mary flourished throughout the medieval period, inspiring countless churches, artworks, hymns, and devotional practices. Mary was seen as the new Eve, through whom salvation came to the world, embodying humility, obedience, and divine motherhood. Her image was pervasive, from magnificent cathedrals dedicated in her name to personal prayer books and devotional objects. The veneration of Mary was not a minor aspect of medieval religious life. It was central, shaping theological thought, artistic expression, and popular piety. Her spiritual strength and moral perfection offered an alternative model for female virtue, one that celebrated women's capacity for goodness and their special connection to the divine. Beyond the Virgin Mary, a multitude of female saints were revered across Europe. Saints like Agnes, Catherine of Alexandria, Cecilia, and Barbara were celebrated for their unwavering faith, their courageous martyrdoms, and their spiritual power. Their stories were widely circulated through hagiographies, which were popular narratives of saints' lives, often read aloud and used as moral examples. These women were portrayed as strong, steadfast, and capable of enduring immense suffering for their beliefs. They were seen as intercessors with God, figures to whom people prayed for healing, protection, and guidance. The lives of these saints provided models of female heroism and spiritual fortitude, directly countering any notion of inherent female weakness. Their relics were cherished, their feast days were celebrated, and their virtues were extolled in sermons and literature, demonstrating a widespread admiration for female spiritual strength. Theological discourse, while at times reflecting patriarchal views, also presented complex arguments about female nature. Scholastics, like Thomas Aquinas, while adhering to prevailing biological theories, also argued for the spiritual equality of men and women before God and the inherent goodness of humanity created in God's image. His writings discussed the distinct roles of men and women, but did not universally condemn women as intrinsically evil. Mystical traditions in particular often elevated the spiritual experiences of women, viewing them as privileged conduits for divine revelation. Women mystics like Hildegard of Bingen, Mechthild of Magdeburg, Julian of Norwich, and Catherine of Siena recorded profound visions and theological insights. Their writings were respected, circulated, and often highly influential, demonstrating that their voices were considered authoritative on matters of faith and spirituality. Hildegard's prophetic visions were endorsed by Pope Eugenius III, and her theological writings were studied. Julian of Norwich's Revelations of Divine Love is a sophisticated theological text that explores the nature of God's love and mercy, using feminine imagery for God. These women were not dismissed as weak or irrational. They were revered as visionaries and teachers, whose spiritual wisdom was sought after by both clergy and laity. Furthermore, medieval literature, while often reflecting societal norms, also showcased women in varied roles, not always as inherently flawed. The heroines in romances, while sometimes damsels in distress, were also portrayed as intelligent, resourceful, and morally upright. Where characters like Guinevere, though flawed, often possessed dignity and influence. Moreover, stories of strong queens, wise abbesses, and courageous peasant women also appeared in chronicles and popular tales. Even in didactic literature, which aimed to teach moral lessons, women were often presented with choices between virtue and vice, implying an inherent capacity for moral action, not a predetermined state of evil. For example, Christine de Pizan, in her Book of the City of Ladies, directly challenged misogynistic views prevalent in her time by celebrating the virtues and achievements of women throughout history. She presented a vast catalog of admirable women, from saints and scholars to warriors and inventors, demonstrating the folly of viewing all women as inherently flawed. Her work explicitly countered the negative stereotypes of women, arguing for their intelligence, courage, and moral strength. These literary examples, whether devotional or secular, offered alternative perspectives on women, moving beyond a simplistic condemnation derived solely from the story of Eve. Number 3, women's voices were suppressed, and they produced no art or literature. The idea that medieval women were silenced and produced no art or literature overlooks a rich and diverse body of creative and intellectual work that has survived to this day. While societal barriers certainly existed, women found ways to express themselves through writing, music, and various forms of visual art. Many women authors emerged, particularly within the monastic tradition, but also among the aristocracy and later in urban centers. Rotsvit of Gandersheim, a 10th century German canoness, stands as one of the earliest known female playwrights in Western history. She wrote Latin comedies and poems inspired by classical authors but with a Christian message, demonstrating her profound education and literary talent. Her works were performed and read, proving that her voice reached beyond the walls of her convent. Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century abbess, polymath, and mystic, was a prolific writer, composer, and artist. Her works include theological treatises like Civius, scientific and medical texts like Physica and Causae Curae, and a vast collection of liturgical songs known as Symphonia Harmoniae Celestium Revelationum. Her compositions are complex and beautiful, showcasing an extraordinary musical talent. She also oversaw the creation of illuminated manuscripts, some of which feature her own visionary artwork. Her writings were widely read and circulated, and her music performed, showing that her artistic and intellectual voice resonated far beyond her immediate community. Marie de France, a 12th century poet, wrote a collection of Breton Las, short narrative poems often focused on themes of love and chivalry, and a collection of Aesopic fables. Her elegant French verse demonstrates sophisticated literary skill and a keen understanding of human nature. Her works were popular in aristocratic courts and were likely intended for an educated audience, proving her literary voice was recognized and valued. Christine de Pizan, writing in the late 14th and early 15th centuries, was arguably the first professional woman writer in France. She authored numerous works including political commentaries, poetry, and the influential Book of the City of Ladies, which systematically celebrated women's achievements and challenged misogynistic stereotypes. Her writing was sought after by patrons, including royalty, demonstrating her intellectual authority and literary success. Julian of Norwich and Marjorie Kempe, two English mystics, both produced significant autobiographical and theological works. Julian's Our Revelations of Divine Love is a profound theological meditation, while Marjorie Kempe's book is a detailed account of her spiritual journey in daily life, offering unique insights into female piety and experience. These texts were circulated, copied, and read by others, confirming that their voices were heard and influential in religious circles. Beyond writing, women also participated actively in the visual arts. Nuns in convents were often skilled illuminators, contributing to the creation of beautiful manuscripts. Convents frequently had scriptoria, where women copied and decorated religious texts. Evidence from extant manuscripts, such as the famous Herod of Landsberg's Hortus Deliciarum, a 12th century illustrated encyclopedia, shows women contributing directly to the visual culture of the time. Noble women and queens were significant patrons of art and literature, commissioning elaborate illuminated manuscripts, tapestries, and architectural projects. Eleanor of Aquitaine, for example, supported poets and musicians, fostering a vibrant court culture. Blanche of Castile commissioned religious art and literature, including the Bible Moralizee, a magnificent illuminated manuscript. These women not only provided financial support, but often influenced the content and style of the commissioned works, making their aesthetic preferences and intellectual interests known. Women were also skilled embroiderers, creating elaborate tapestries and vestments for churches and aristocratic homes. The Bayeux tapestry, while not exclusively made by women, is a testament to the skill involved in textile arts, an area where women often excelled. These textile works were not merely decorative, they conveyed stories, history, and social messages, making them a significant form of artistic expression. Women were also musicians, singing in churches and convents and performing in aristocratic courts. While their names are less frequently recorded in historical documents compared to male composers, their presence as performers and their contribution to musical culture is undeniable. The existence of hymn collections and plainchant composed or arranged within female monastic communities further suggests their active role in musical creation. The sheer volume and quality of these artistic and literary contributions demonstrate that medieval women were not silent but possessed powerful creative voices that shaped the cultural landscape of their era. Number 4. Women were solely confined to the domestic sphere and had no public roles. The notion that medieval women were strictly confined to the domestic sphere, only seen within the confines of their homes and never in public life, is a simplification that ignores the multifaceted roles women played in various sectors of society. While the primary expectation for many women was indeed domesticity and family care, historical records reveal women actively participating in the public realm, from the highest levels of governance to everyday commerce and religious leadership. Royal and noble women frequently stepped into public roles, especially as regents for underage sons or absent husbands. Blanche of Castile, mother of Louis IX, ruled France with exceptional competence and authority during her son's minority in the 13th century. She commanded armies, negotiated treaties, suppressed rebellions, and managed the royal administration, effectively acting as the sovereign. Her public appearances, diplomatic missions, and political decisions were central to the stability of the French kingdom. Eleanor of Aquitaine, a duchess in her own right, famously governed her vast territories and later served as regent for her son Richard the Lionheart, presiding over court cases, issuing charters, and actively engaging in international diplomacy. These powerful women were not just figureheads, they were active political players who shaped the destinies of nations. Beyond the aristocracy, women were vital participants in urban economies and public marketplaces. In towns and cities across Europe, women were active in various trades and crafts. They worked as shopkeepers, selling goods like bread, ale, cloth, and produce. They were engaged in professions such as brewing, weaving, spinning, dyeing, and even butchery. Guild records from cities like Paris, London, and Cologne often list women as members, sometimes even as masters of their trades, demonstrating their involvement in the organized economic life of their communities. These women operated businesses, managed apprentices, and interacted directly with customers in public spaces. For example, in London, the records of the Brewers Guild show numerous women operating as independent brewers, selling their ale in the public market. The marketplace itself was a highly public space where women engaged in commercial transactions, socialized, and exchanged information. These women were not hidden away, they were visible, active contributors to the economic life of their towns, their voices heard in the bustling marketplace. Religious women, particularly abbesses, also held significant public roles. An abbess was the spiritual and temporal head of a convent, managing vast estates, overseeing numerous staff, and often holding feudal authority over surrounding lands and villages. Abbesses, like Hildegard of Bingen, not only managed complex monastic communities, but also engaged in extensive correspondence with popes, emperors, and kings, offering political and spiritual advice. She went on preaching tours, speaking to both clerical and lay audiences, a highly public activity for a woman in her time. These abbesses were powerful figures who dealt with secular rulers, legal officials, and other religious leaders, asserting their rights and protecting their communities. Their influence extended far beyond the convent walls, making them prominent figures in their regions. Women also participated in various public social activities, such as pilgrimages, religious processions, and community festivals. Pilgrimages were a significant aspect of medieval life, and women, both alone and in groups, undertook long journeys to holy sites. Marjorie Kempy's extensive pilgrimages to Jerusalem, Rome, and Santiago de Compostela illustrate a woman's physical and spiritual presence in the public sphere, traveling across continents and interacting with diverse communities. Women were present at village feasts, church gatherings, and local markets, where they socialized, exchanged news, and participated in communal life. While not always holding formal political power, their presence and participation in these various public spheres were crucial to the social and economic fabric of medieval society, proving that their lives were not solely confined to the privacy of their homes. Number 5. Women had no legal standing or property rights. The assertion that medieval women possessed no legal standing or property rights is a broad generalization that does not accurately reflect the diverse legal landscapes and practical realities of the period. While legal systems varied significantly across regions and changed over time, women often held, inherited, managed, and controlled property, and they frequently participated in legal processes. Dower rights, for example, were a widespread legal custom that granted a widow a portion of her deceased husband's property, typically 1/3 of his lands or goods, for her lifetime. This provision was intended to ensure her financial security and was legally enforceable. A widow could manage this dower land, derive income from it, and even participate in legal disputes to protect her rights to it. For instance, countless court records from England and France detail widows petitioning courts to uphold their dower rights against challenging relatives or overlords. These women were not passive recipients. They actively defended their legal entitlements. Beyond dower, women could also inherit property in their own right, especially in the absence of male heirs or through specific customs like partable inheritance, where property was divided among all children, including daughters. Noblewomen frequently inherited vast estates, often becoming significant landowners in their own right. Eleanor of Aquitaine, for instance, inherited the immensely rich duchy of Aquitaine from her father, making her one of the most powerful women in Europe. She held and managed this territory independently, and it remained her personal possession even after her marriages to the King of France and then the King of England. Her legal title to Aquitaine was a fundamental aspect of her political power. Matilda of Tuscany, in the 11th century, was a powerful ruler who inherited and controlled extensive territories in northern Italy. She issued charters, commanded armies, and engaged in complex political maneuvers, all based on her legal claim to her lands. These examples demonstrate that women could hold significant property in their own name, and their rights were recognized and often protected by law. Married women's property rights were more complex, as they were often subsumed under their husband's legal identity in some legal traditions, such as English common law. However, even within these systems, there were exceptions and mechanisms for women to retain control over property. Their dowries, for instance, were assets that a bride brought into a marriage, and while they often passed into the husband's control, they were sometimes held separately or could be recovered by the wife if the marriage ended in divorce or annulment. Furthermore, some legal systems, particularly in continental Europe, recognized separate property for married women, allowing them to own and manage assets independently of their husbands. This was common in urban centers where women participated in trade. Women running businesses in towns often had their own accounts and engaged in contracts, indicating a degree of legal and financial autonomy even while married. Records from mercantile guilds and city courts frequently list women engaging in transactions, borrowing money, and incurring debts independently, all of which required legal standing. Women also regularly appeared in court, both as plaintiffs and defendants, demonstrating their capacity to engage with the legal system. They brought cases concerning land disputes, debts, inheritances, and even criminal matters. For example, the records of manorial courts in England show women prosecuting neighbors for trespass, defending their property rights, and engaging in various civil actions. Court documents from the Parliament of Paris and other royal courts also reveal women pursuing legal claims, indicating their access to and use of formal legal processes. They used legal documents like charters, deeds, and wills to assert their rights, define inheritances, and manage their estates. Women made wills to determine the distribution of their property after death, showing direct control over their assets. These documents often reveal specific bequests to family members, servants, and religious institutions, illustrating their personal decisions regarding their wealth. The evidence from legal records across various regions of medieval Europe confirms that women were not universally without legal standing or property rights. Instead, they navigated and utilized the legal systems of their time to protect their interests and manage their assets. Number 6. Women were universally uneducated and illiterate. The widespread belief that medieval women were universally uneducated and illiterate is a significant oversimplification of a complex reality. While formal schooling was not as widespread as it is today and varied by social class and geographic location, many women, particularly those in aristocratic and monastic settings, received significant education. Others acquired practical literacy for economic or religious purposes. Noble women, for example, were often educated at home by tutors or in the households of other noble families. This education frequently included reading, writing, Latin, arithmetic, household management, and sometimes even falconry, music, and embroidery. These skills were considered essential for managing large estates, overseeing households, and participating in courtly life. Eleanor of Aquitaine, for instance, was known for her exceptional education, which included Latin, poetry, and music. She fostered a vibrant intellectual and artistic court, indicating her own high level of cultural literacy and learning. Many other aristocratic women commissioned and owned books, built personal libraries, and corresponded in writing, all clear signs of literacy and intellectual engagement. The existence of numerous illuminated manuscripts dedicated to or owned by noble women further supports the idea of their literacy and their appreciation for learning. Convents were major centers of female education and literacy. For many women, entering a monastic community provided the best opportunity for formal schooling and intellectual pursuits. Nuns learned to read and write Latin, the language of scholarship and theology, as well as the vernacular. They studied scripture, patristic texts, and classical authors. Some convents maintained extensive libraries and scriptoria, where nuns copied, illuminated, and even authored texts. Rotswit of Gandersheim, the 10th century German canoness, wrote Latin dramas and poems, demonstrating a mastery of classical forms and language that would have been impossible without a rigorous education. Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century abbess, was not only a prolific writer, but also an accomplished composer, scientist, and theologian, whose complex works required extensive literacy and intellectual training. Her surviving letters show her engaging in sophisticated correspondence with emperors, popes, and scholars, proving her ability to communicate in writing at the highest levels. The very existence of their written works, often preserved in beautifully copied manuscripts, stands as direct evidence of a literate female population within monastic life. Even outside the elite and monastic circles, a degree of practical literacy existed among some urban women, especially those involved in trade and commerce. Women who ran shops, managed businesses, or participated in guilds often needed basic literacy and numeracy skills to keep accounts, write letters, and record transactions. While not necessarily reading Latin theological treatises, they could read and write in the vernacular to manage their daily affairs. Guild records and commercial documents sometimes bear women's signatures or marks, indicating their involvement in transactions that would have required some level of literacy. Moreover, devotional literacy was also present among laywomen. Many women learned to read in order to access prayer books, psalters, and other religious texts in their vernacular language. Books of hours, personal prayer books often richly illuminated, were popular among pious laywomen and provided a means for private devotion and spiritual engagement requiring reading ability. Marjorie Kempe, a laywoman from Norfolk, though she dictated her autobiography to scribes due to her own difficulty with writing, was certainly literate in a broader sense, having read and discussed religious texts and engaged in theological arguments with clergy and lay people. Her active participation in religious discourse shows a high level of comprehension and intellectual engagement. The evidence from surviving documents, personal letters, wills, and inventories of libraries reveals that literacy among medieval women was far from universal, but it was also not non-existent. The number of women who could read and write, or at least had access to written materials and participated in a literate culture, was greater than often assumed. Their educational opportunities and access to books varied greatly depending on their social standing and geographical location, but to claim universal illiteracy dismisses the significant intellectual contributions and daily lives of countless women who engage with the written word.